It's the Leading on Purpose podcast, helping leaders, teams, and organizations lead more intentionally, effectively, and with purpose. Thanks for tuning in. We're back again with another episode of the Leading on Purpose podcast. Today, Doug and I are tackling the idea of beliefs and how important they are to our effectiveness as a leader, our relationships with others in the workplace, outside the workplace. Doug, thanks again. Great to talk with you today.
John, it's always good to talk with you as well. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation and this topic. It's an important one, and it's one that I think many of us really underestimate the power of the beliefs that we hold and maybe don't have a full awareness of what those beliefs are. So looking forward to spending some time today exploring beliefs from several different perspectives and the way they impact us, not only in our work life, but any relationship that we're in.
Yeah, they have a huge impact. And when we think about leadership, oftentimes I think where our mind gravitates to when we think about developing ourselves, maybe changing some things that we're doing, it's easy to gravitate towards how are we behaving. And so I think what's really interesting to think about with regards to beliefs is how much they shape our actions. That how we show up, what we do, the way we say things is largely shaped by some of the stories we're telling ourselves up here in our heads. And so this belief piece is such an important component of leadership. It dovetails directly with a couple of our prior topics in terms of emotional intelligence, the coaching leadership style. And I'm confident our audience will see those connections as we work through this, but thought I'd point that out. So really the three main perspectives or buckets we'll kind of put this in as we look at beliefs. One is the beliefs we hold about ourselves. And we'll get into that in just a moment, but what's that self-talk? When we look in the mirror, what is it we're telling ourselves? Another perspective or bucket will be our beliefs about those around us. And that can include the people we lead, people in our peer group, certainly our boss, people outside of work. Yep. And then last, but certainly not least, the beliefs others hold about us. So, Doug, for you and your experiences over the years as a leader, coach, consultant, why does this belief piece overall play such a heavy hand for being an effective leader? Why is it so important?
Yeah, it's a couple things, John, for me, as you ask that question, and maybe we'll focus specifically on leadership from right now. So the one thing about beliefs, and we'll start with the first one, the beliefs about ourselves. My own personal experience, and any of us that are alive and breathing and walking on the face of the earth, whether we realize it or not, are carrying these beliefs. First of all, many of the beliefs that we have about ourselves started at very early ages. You used the word stories a bit ago. These are truly stories that have been developed over time that we carry with us, and they evolve over time as well. So when you think about your own development as a leader, the importance of beliefs is understanding where am I today in my beliefs? Which beliefs that I have about myself are positively contributing to my effectiveness as a leader? And what are the beliefs that I'm carrying about myself that tend to get in the way? And John, as I've coached folks over the years and even my own development, I think one of the more challenging lifts, if you will, is how do you go about changing those beliefs that you have about yourself and still be your true authentic self, but understanding that this particular belief, as long as that's real to me, whether I'm aware of it or not, it's like this story that's always playing in the background is really getting in the way. So I think step one in our development as it relates to our own beliefs is identifying what are those beliefs. And that can be a really challenging conversation to have with yourself, or if you're working with a coach, I think a coach can be very effective in helping you articulate what those beliefs are without judgment. They are what they are. So I love what you said about, we tend to want to focus on behaviors and changing behaviors. I am very much a believer, if you will, that the starting point are the beliefs that we have, and being aware of those and understanding with a different set of beliefs, how would my behavior shift or change? What is it I'm working to? And what are the beliefs that I just need to start to lean into that may seem foreign to me, that don't seem authentic to me? But in order for me to behave or change my behavior in a certain way, those beliefs need to change as well.
Yeah. Well, and so if our actions and behaviors are shaped by our beliefs, I think you pointed to something that's really important for everyone to understand. What's shaping those beliefs? Stories and experiences.
Yep.
And I don't know, just as I'm kind of thinking about it off the cuff here, when we think about these three buckets, my belief about myself, my beliefs about others, others' beliefs about me, might it be this is the hardest set of beliefs to shift?
Yeah.
And I would have to guess part of the reason for that is if it's about stories and experiences largely that are shaping those beliefs. Well, when I think about shifting others' beliefs, well, part of that would be providing them a different experience. So maybe that's a little bit easier. Well, how do we shift that experience and story for ourselves?
Yes.
Is probably kind of the quandary here.
Yeah, it really is, and it's not easy. And just last night, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to a fundraising event here in Kansas City for an organization, John, that you're very familiar with, Operation Breakthrough,
Oh,
had their
wow.
annual gala last night. And we could do an entire podcast on Operation
I know.
Breakthrough, and it's an organization that is basically this. To call it a daycare in the inner city of Kansas City is not doing it justice. Yeah. This is an organization that transforms the lives of these young people and the trajectory of their lives. That without Operation Breakthrough, a lot of these kids, their lives would be very different. But one of the things that was very evident to me last night is as we heard testimonials, we saw video of the kids that have been impacted at Operation Breakthrough. A lot of it is targeted and focused on developing healthy belief systems in these young people, the stories that they tell themselves. Because a lot of these young people, and they talk about it, they live in neighborhoods where they've seen people shot and killed in the streets right outside of their house. They experience racism in ways that are just so painful. And without the experiences that Operation Breakthrough provides, those are the experiences that would be the basis of their beliefs. And so it's interesting we're having this conversation today after just being at this incredible event last night that raised a ton of money to do really great things here in Kansas City. But they are all about foundationally changing the beliefs that these kids have about themselves in spite of the living conditions and the experiences that they see around them each and every day. So you talk about challenging work for the teachers and the staff there, for them to be consistent in their message and reinforcing the love that they have for these kids and their worthiness. You know, that's probably the biggest message I came away from that event last night, is the sense that these kids believe I'm worthy.
Yeah.
I am someone. My life matters, and I can make a difference in this world. So yeah, it's tough. It is tough work, even in environments that they don't have the things, you know, that those kids face each and every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I see it in the work I've also done over the years with organizations that are working in the world of homelessness and finding solutions for that. And those solutions don't work unless you can get those individuals to tell themselves a different story about themselves. And it's a huge shift. It's a huge thing for an individual to take on, is to, you know, to your point, if this is what's going on around me, to be able to tell myself a different story is such a difficult lift. The other thing you pointed to that I think is really important here too is, you know, I think at a foundational level, where to start in terms of your beliefs about yourself. That idea of worthiness, I think, is huge. And I know you and I have used Brene Brown's work quite a bit over the years, and her ideas around vulnerability. One of the most powerful things that I think she talks about is, the difference between people who experience high levels of a sense of love and belonging. Well, for a lot of those people, most of those people in her research, it starts with what they're telling themselves around their own level
Right.
of worthiness. And so it starts with, I believe I'm worthy of, a meaningful relationship. I believe I'm worthy of having a sense of belonging in my workplace. And so I think that's at a foundational level, maybe one of the first stories people should attempt to tell themselves is I am worthy of,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so if a person is really wanting to do the deep dive into their own growth and development and identify the beliefs that are just kind of core to their being, and I don't want to make light of that because candidly, some of that work does involve the help and support of whether it be a coach, whether it be a therapist, whatever it might be, because some of these beliefs have been part of our DNA for so long that we're now blind to them. We just don't even realize they're there. So anyone that's listening to this and they're curious about it and have been struggling in certain areas of their life, I couldn't encourage you enough to get that kind of professional help and support. Someone that just can walk that journey with you and maybe shine a light on some of the beliefs that you're not even aware that you have, and help you better understand how those beliefs are impacting the life that you're living. And so, if you think about your own development, there's that type of work that you can do on your own, the help of another person. The other thing I like to just suggest to people that they consider is who is surrounding you in your life, and what are the beliefs that you're developing yourself because of your relationship with them. If I think back on my career, I've been blessed to have some really great leaders that I've worked with and reported to. And one of the things that those leaders had in common is when I was struggling in performance, they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. They had beliefs about me that I didn't have myself. And through their leadership, through their persistence, through their consistency in the way they treated me. And it could be, for example, if I blew a project, something didn't turn out well, instead of saying, well, I guess Doug's just not capable to do that. It's like, no, you're capable. You are absolutely capable. Here's another opportunity to work on that. And you get enough of those interactions from folks, it can start to click for you.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is I've unfortunately also worked for some leaders that probably didn't help a whole lot when it would come to beliefs about yourself. So if you had that project that didn't turn out well, it could be something like, well, Doug, apparently you're just not really good at numbers or analytics or whatever the project involved. We'll find something else for you to do. So it's not just about your individual journey working on your beliefs, but also being very aware, who am I surrounding myself with? What messages are they giving me? What are they reinforcing that's either aligned with where I want to go, some of the beliefs about myself that need to be improved, or are they working against me? So it's just really taking all of that in as you're working on yourself.
Yeah. No, and I would absolutely agree. If I point to the top two or three bosses, leaders that I've ever worked for who really, when I look back, had an impact on not just me professionally, but my life. In a moment, we'll talk about this other bucket of our beliefs of others and how that
Right.
impacts things. What we're really speaking to is how someone can influence the beliefs you have about yourself. So it's even more than just how they see you, perceive you, but the ability and opportunity there to get someone to tell themselves a different story, to shift their self-talk. And those, top 2 leaders that I've ever had that I could think of right now, they were very successful at that. They got me to tell myself a different story about myself,
Yep.
which, as we've said, already, started to shift my behaviors and actions based on what I
Yep.
believed was possible. So, very, very powerful piece here in terms of what a leader can do to influence this. So I'm hearing maybe a few tactics, if you will,
Mhm.
to examine this belief about self. One is just the reflection piece that I think I heard earlier as you were describing where this all starts. Examining what's the story I'm currently telling myself when I look in the mirror. What does the self-talk look like, and how do I feel about that self-talk? What needs to maybe be shifted? The other piece of this sounds like it's where appropriate, getting some guidance and support from a really objective partner
Yep.
of sorts, whether that's, to your point, a therapist, a coach. Those are all people that I think can help provide some of that. But I'm also hearing maybe a third component here, challenging the people maybe that you work closely with. It could be a leader,
Yep.
A peer that you hold near and dear, someone that you can say to them, hey, I'm looking to shift some of my self-talk. And there's a different story I want to start telling myself. Can you, one, give me some reaction and feedback to that, but 2, can you support me?
Yes. Absolutely.
Anything else that we haven't covered here when it comes to this notion of shifting the self-talk and shifting these beliefs about self?
Well, the last thing I would say on that is give yourself grace.
Yeah.
Um, it's so if you have a certain belief about yourself that's been part of your DNA for decades, for whatever reason, it's going to take a while for it to truly change. There's an old saying, and I have mixed reactions to it. Maybe you've heard it as well. It says, fake it till you make it. So if there's a version of me that I really want to grow and develop and make more real for myself, is start acting that way, and then the feelings and beliefs about yourself will catch up. And I do believe there's truth to that and helpful. But I've also, especially in the coaching work that I've done, I will routinely run into folks that just aren't patient enough and don't give themselves enough grace. So let's say we talk about a certain behavior and we've identified the beliefs that's kind of in the way of that behavior. And, 2 weeks later, we're having another coaching conversation and they're throwing their hands up in the air and say, I'm just not that.
Right.
As opposed to just continuing to unpack it. And yeah, maybe you weren't too bright on how you wanted to be, but celebrate any progress towards where you were in any moment where that belief started to shift for you. So you mentioned earlier, this is maybe some most challenging work of all the beliefs that we're going to talk about today. So just be patient and give yourself grace in this process.
Yeah. Well, maybe a couple of other points on this. One of the trip ups I see for people who are working on defining a purpose for themselves, working on defining their why, is related to what you just said, where, if I'm so far off the mark of the story that I intend to tell myself, I may talk myself out of, authoring something, holding myself accountable to something that is, way beyond what I'm currently doing. And so what I'm hearing here is it's not necessarily fake it till you make it, but don't be afraid when it comes to the story you want to shift to think big with it.
Yep.
It's like, this is the story I want to be able to tell myself, and my current behaviors are a ways off of that. We'll realize that starting to shift those behaviors is what's going to bring you more in line, and to your point, to bright on this.
Yep.
But as we said, during our emotional intelligence conversations, this is another one of those examples. You begin the journey where you're at, not where you'd like to
Right.
be. And so as you look in the mirror, one of the most negative versions of self-talk is that, I'm not where I want to be.
Yep.
And that can talk you right out of maybe shifting these belief systems about yourself in a way that's aspirational.
Yes.
And so it's something worth looking at. Now, one other maybe slant on this is, as you're listening to this, maybe a lot of this sounds like, well, this is all about, tabling negative beliefs, setting aside things that aren't, serving me well. There's another aspect of this that I think would also include curiosity. And so say you get up in the morning and you're telling yourself a great story about yourself, maybe too great of a story that's not fully rooted in reality. And so one of the aspects of maybe emotional intelligence or just being kind of insatiably curious about what you can do better as a leader, as a, just a human being should be, are there things in my blind spot? Are there things that I ought to be aware of that ought to be part of my self-talk so that I can work on those things?
Yep.
And so this isn't just about, everyone gets up in the morning and tells themselves a negative story. I've had experiences and moments in my life where I think the story that I was telling myself needed a bit of a reality check.
Yep.
And so it's just, maybe another way to look at this. Great. So second bucket then are beliefs about others. And probably one of the biggest showstoppers in a relationship in the workplace, particularly when you think about an individual that you're leading. I've had so many experiences, both on the receiving end and as a leader myself, certainly now as a coach, where the beliefs we hold about those around us can be either the very thing that unlocks potential and performance for a person, or the biggest and most immovable obstacle that a person faces in shifting their performance. And so this is a huge one. And certainly our actions and behaviors as a leader are a demonstration to others what we believe. But it is this kind of luggage, this baggage sometimes that we carry with us that we have to be extremely aware of, because I've had so many experiences where, whether you like it or not, these beliefs show up.
Yep.
And so I think the classic example is you're about to provide someone some feedback about a performance situation that is really maybe frustrating you. Well, being very mindful, what is that baggage I'm bringing with me to this conversation in terms of how I view this person, how I view their actions? And it's another example. What story have I made up in my head around why this happened? So huge piece here when we think about, effective leadership.
Yeah, it's a great point. John, I was just thinking back over my career when I was leading teams. One of the, and I did it different ways. I don't know if there's a right way or a wrong way. I'll just share what I did towards the end of my career, what I found to work best. But let's say that you're taking over a new team, you're providing leadership to a new team. And especially if I was new to an organization and I didn't have any prior knowledge or relationships with these folks, but even if it was an internal move in the organization, I may know the folks from a distance. But initially, when I was in a leadership role, one of the very first things I would do when I would take over a new team is I would go to their files and read former performance reviews and notes, and I might even talk with the prior leader if that person was still available to me. Because in my mind, it's like, oh, this is really going to help accelerate the process
I'm
and
doing
help
research.
me connect with it. Yes, yeah, I'm doing my research. And over time, what started to occur to me is basically the file that I was reading and the conversations I was having with the former leader, if I had that, was just simply filling my head with their beliefs about those individuals. And so where I ended up is I just tried as best I could to go in open and just say, I'm just going to sit down and get to know these folks and who they are and what motivates them and what's their journey, what's their purpose, what do they want to accomplish without any preconceived notions or beliefs about these individuals. And there were several times, and this is the part of leadership that I just always so enjoyed, and I don't say this in a bragging kind of way, just from a fulfillment kind of way. But if I took over a team and I start to get feedback from others in the organization saying, "What's up with fill in the blank, Bob?"
Yeah.
Bob is on fire these days. We haven't seen that kind of energy. He's actually here early. The quality of his work is going up. And as a leader, you've got an opportunity to have that real impact, because I don't have these preconceived notions and beliefs of Bob. I treat him as a respected, capable human being. And that's what our interactions are. That's what the quality of the project work I might assign to him. Now, doesn't always happen
Right.
that way. But how many of us have seen that when there is a change in leadership, that it's like that new leader is the pilot light that just gets that person going? They'd been checked out, and it could be the prior leader that they had just simply had lost belief in them, or they had beliefs about that person that weren't positive. And people know it. If your boss has given up on you, you trust me, you can't disguise that. People know it. So anyway, it's from a tactical standpoint as a leader. That's one of the things that I noticed over many years of leading teams that just work better for me. I just would rather go in and not be downloaded all those former beliefs about individuals.
Yeah, I've had a similar set of experiences, and for a number of years, I was in a operations leadership role. And as I look back, I kind of call myself the 101st Airborne. They'd send me to, have me parachute into the worst possible situations and bat cleanup. And so these were operations with 70 to 100 people, and the operations weren't running well for all sorts of reasons. And I would say probably after the second or third go round of taking over a struggling location, I grew to not enjoy the guided tour, as I called it, where there's this handoff. And I guess part of my reaction, this was maybe a little judgy, was, if your belief system had been working, then I probably wouldn't need to be here. For one, there's a reason this operation isn't working well. But the sense of relief you can see on people's faces when they feel like they're not working from underneath the pressure of someone's negative belief system that they've developed. And that's where the blossoming happens.
Yeah.
And, if I were to point back to those turnaround situations that were most successful, because they weren't all great and they weren't all perfect, and they definitely weren't all successful. The ones that were on the more successful end were situations where I think people really felt like, I've got a clean slate here.
Yep.
I'm still going to be held accountable to performance, and that carries with me. But there's a fresh start here for me to have my leader believe that it's possible for me to perform at all, new heights. And without that, I don't think you can really have change. If the self-talk I have is, oh, my boss doesn't believe in me, it's pretty hard to work from underneath that. That creates way too much pressure for people to shift. And so I've had the same experience. I'm not a big fan of the guided tour. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's what I suggest when I'm coaching leaders who are stepping into a turnaround situation. Hey, I'm being tapped to go over here. It's broke. I've been told to fix it. It's like, if you can, walk in there with this clean slate that we're talking about.
Yes.
And that way, it gives everyone the best chance to, if they haven't been performing, to turn it around. Now, the challenge here is, how many situations are we in as leaders where, despite a performance issue, despite something that's really frustrated us, we're not shifting leaders. I'm still going to be your leader. You feeling like it's possible to shift performance under the same condition, same situation. That shift in beliefs is really important here. And so when we are in a situation where we're addressing a serious performance concern, the messages we send to someone around our belief as to whether it's possible for them to get this turned around are more important than the details of the feedback that we're providing. And so in earlier episodes, when we talked about the coaching leadership style, I would go as far as to say, if you're not in the mindset that someone can get the performance situation turned around, that it's possible, you don't have that belief, I would argue you're not anywhere in the neighborhood of the right mindset to actually use the coaching leadership style, much less have an effective feedback conversation. And so, Doug, what say you about, these situations where it's not a shift in leadership? I'm going to continue to be your leader, and, how my beliefs, even given performance circumstances and situations, impact you.
So, John, the situation you just described, if I understood it correctly, assuming that it's not the change in leader. Yeah. Oh, could you ask a more challenging question? So, one of the things that I have found helpful for myself, and then also coaching leaders as well, is, first of all, what's key to this is for me as a leader to even realize there's an opportunity for me to revisit my beliefs about this person. That if I'm frustrated with another person's performance and the associated behaviors, the most control, the impact I can have on that person's behavior starts with me.
Yeah.
So it seems simple, but boy, that's a big aha for someone to have. And if you can understand that, if let's say that you're on my team and you're a team member, and purely hypothetical, I would ever have a performance issue with you, John.
No.
But if I did, to step back and have a truthful, hard conversation with myself, saying, what beliefs do I have about John? And then the corresponding behaviors that are likely contributing to this performance issue. So let's say that I had a belief about you that you're not creative. You're just not a creative person, and your role requires a certain level of creativity. Well, what I might notice, because I have this belief about you that you're not creative, then I start noticing, what are the types of things I'm asking you to do? How micromanaging am I of your work? How forceful am I of my ideas on you? And if you start thinking about that, it's like, well, maybe his apparent lack of creativity isn't because he doesn't have it within him. It's just that I'm leading him and relating to him in a way, because I don't believe he's creative, that's causing the very response I don't want to see. So if you can have that moment of truth with yourself, is then to say, okay, if I came from this from a place of total belief in his creativity and capability, if I truly embrace that, what would my leadership of, in this case, you, John, look like? How would I talk with him? How would we approach new projects and assignments and opportunities? And John, almost inevitably, for myself and also folks that I've coached through this process, you just start to see some ahas. And it's like, oh, well, I need to do this differently. I need to try this approach. And again, it's not going to happen overnight, because you and I have established this dance step with each other in the relationship. And you might even want to, bring the person into what it is you're doing. But it's to me, that's the heavy lift part of this, is to recognize that the way I've been leading you, interacting with you, is contributing to this. Let's try some new and different ways to relate to each other that all have at its foundation a belief in this example I'm using, that you are a creative person. So, those, maybe you've had a very creative person on your staff. So it shouldn't even be new to you to think, well, when Susan was on my team, she was very creative. How did I relate to Susan? Well, the answers might be right there. Those same things I did with her
Yep.
could be the very things that bring forward the kind of performance I need to see from John. So again, it's that starting point is it's about me as a leader. It's got to start with me. For me to sit here and continue to lead the way I've always led, and hopefully a new version of you is going to show up magically one day in the workplace, which frankly is a lot of times how I see leaders do it. It's just like, well, I'll just keep trudging along with them and maybe someday he'll finally get it, as opposed to understanding if I truly want the change has to begin with me.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think what I've noticed is if you're carrying more of a negative set of beliefs, and a lot of times those are rooted in assumptions and conclusions we've made
Yep.
about things that may or usually may not be true at all about the person as to why they did what they did, why they didn't do what we asked. And so what's interesting to me is I think people in general, their performance will rise to the level of your negative belief set, and then that's it. Versus coming at a person with high levels of curiosity around their performance, their potential, just going into it, seeing, there's just something we haven't tried yet to unlock this person's potential. You'll see that their upside, usually in a very remarkable way, far exceeds your expectations. And it can be part of that piece, we were talking about earlier, where it starts to shift their beliefs in themselves. When it's this open door possibility type belief set that we're bringing to our interactions with them. Now, I mentioned assumptions and conclusions. This is one of those pieces of self-management, I think, that we talked about during our emotional intelligence assessment or emotional intelligence episode. Big act of self-management as it relates to beliefs is another point of self-reflection. So if looking in the mirror and challenging ourselves on our self-talk is important to our beliefs about ourselves, one thing that's really important in terms of our beliefs about others is another opportunity to reflect. What story am I telling myself about this person? What conclusions have I come to? And, I think there's a lot of research that says human beings are rational beings. And yeah, maybe. I think we're rationalizing beings. And what is so often happening, that's just human nature, what the brain is trying to do is make sense out of what's going on.
Yep.
And so we see a situation happen and it's just a snippet. It's a moment, a snapshot. And we will insert all sorts of stuff around that, this story we shape around this one observation that, again, may or may not be true. And so appreciating, one, the danger of those types of assumptions and conclusions, because then those now turn into beliefs. And so your example of, seeing that, well, I've just decided this person is not creative. That's the conclusion I've jumped to. How that will arguably poison the actions you take with that person, and even how you observe them the next time. So if I'm looking at this through the lens of, I don't believe you're creative, guess what I'll notice?
That's exactly right.
All moments throughout the day, all moments throughout the projects you're assigned where you missed opportunities to be creative. And so you kind of poison your own well sometimes if you're allowing these conclusions and assumptions to really take hold. And so such a key point of self-reflection is to examine, all right, before I even go, address this performance concern or have feedback with this person, or just have a, talent development type conversation. What are those stories I'm telling myself?
Yeah, it's in the world of psychology that what you're describing is, if you have a belief and then something happens, you notice something from the other person that doesn't align with that, it creates a dissonance and a discomfort. And human beings naturally migrate towards comfort. So to your point, you're going to be more noticing a behavior that affirms the belief you have than doesn't affirm it. And it works with good performers as well. We've kind of been focused on folks that have, that maybe their performance isn't where we want it to be. But I've also seen this play out where, you believe X about somebody, and then all you notice are those good traits, or when it's working well. And when it doesn't, sometimes we'll even rationalize, why is that happening for that person? It's not due to their skill, or maybe they're not getting enough sleep, or whatever it might be. So there is this element of us as human beings that when we have beliefs, we are much more attuned to noticing evidence of confirmation of our beliefs than not. The one other thing I will attach to that, before we talked about your own beliefs and yourself, give yourself grace, is also to have grace for others as you're trying new ways of interacting with them, developing new beliefs. I also think we have a bias towards people getting it right and all the way right and doing it quickly. So one of the things I've struggled with, not just as a leader, but even with my kids over the years, and they're now, wonderful grown adults, is if somebody is working on something, and we'll go back to the workplace, a particular behavior, and you need to get them from A to C in terms of their behavior, and they're not to C yet, but they've inched towards it. Maybe they're at B.
Yeah.
Is to celebrate and recognize that. Notice the improvement. Now, it doesn't mean you're compromising the ultimate accountability and the performance goal for the person, but you talk about forcing a change in your own beliefs to say, you know what, John, that project that you worked on, here are the elements of creativity in that project that I noticed that I don't think I've seen in other projects before. Are you noticing the same thing about yourself? Now, there also could be a laundry list of the things that still weren't what they needed to be, but I'm not going to lead with that.
Right.
I want to lead with, here's where I'm noticing the move. Are you noticing the move? Are you excited about it? Is it starting to become real to you as well? Again, it doesn't mean you can't coach and comment and give feedback on the other things, but that is huge for you as a leader and for the person on your team to have that acknowledgement and to notice it. Even though it's not exactly where we ultimately need it to be, at least we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, that notion you and I have talked about so many times, the awaiting perfection to provide praise versus the progress.
Yep.
There's another piece of beliefs in there maybe too, even in the act of providing someone feedback. And let's say I'm giving you, some tough feedback, and you and I are in agreement in terms of our beliefs around what success would look like, given the performance issue we're discussing. There also needs to be alignment in our beliefs around what progress and milestones look like along the way. And so even, defining some of that at the outset, and when I'm observing you, what do I believe to be progress versus what do you believe to be progress? Being aligned on that, I think is really critical to this.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe this fits a little bit in our third bucket as well, but I just, if I were to try to find a way to compel people to find it in themselves to really believe in the people they lead, a story that I would share of a moment in my career where the most meaningful example I can think of someone believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, but even when I was in a situation where I felt like I didn't earn the beliefs that they were offering me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to those operations days I was mentioning earlier. As 101st Airborne, being transferred from location to location to clean things up. And I remember I had a pretty long string of successes there. And so they put me into a situation, moved myself and my family across the country. We really uprooted. And part of that was by choice. And other was just there was this opportunity to go take over a struggling market. And so I get there, and nothing that I had done up until that point was serving me well for whatever reason. And by the way, as I look back, this was more than a decade ago. I still can't tell you exactly what went wrong in this situation as I look back. And I've tried to unpack it and reflect on it. I still can't tell you, I would do this differently, that differently. I don't know. But it lasted about 2.5 years, this situation, in terms of how long I was in that seat. And I almost ruined my life, personally and professionally, because I could not get this situation turned around. And I asked for a lot of help throughout the situation, called various leaders at all levels in the organization to come and help me observe the situation, see what's going on, where, why is this happening? And, I wasn't really sure, what do they see in me? Do they see me as the problem? And so just not being really sure about that along the way. So got to a point where finally, after 2.5 years, I decided, well, I'm not doing you any favors by staying in this situation. Unfortunately, my family and I really enjoy this part of the country where we've moved to. I think I need to resign. And so I remember one of the higher ups that I had called on numerous occasions to come and help observe and help me try to put my finger on what the performance issues were, came back in and for a visit and said, "Hey, I'm really disappointed to hear that you're hanging it up. Totally makes sense. I get why you came to that decision. However, have you thought about this opportunity that's in Denver, Colorado?" And so I remember going, well, I'm not doing a good job. My performance is terrible.
Right.
I've just resigned. And here's this individual talking to me about a new opportunity. And so, I remember saying, yeah, I don't think my family is prepared to move again, so on and so forth. So he came in another day, a couple of weeks later, and said, "Have you thought any more about that position?" And at this point, I think I'm 4 or 5 days away from my resignation date. And so he comes in again, and I said, "Yeah, I just don't think my wife will move." And he says, "Well, go home and talk to her. Have you asked her?" I said, "Well, not directly. Go home. I'll cover things here. You go home and ask." And so I go home, and my wife said, "I'll move. We can do this." And so I remember after crossing over that obstacle, the biggest obstacle I knew I had to face is there was an individual that I was going to be dotted line reporting into for this other role in Denver. And this individual is pretty well known across the organization as a tough operator. Really holds people to a high level when it comes to performance expectations. Not a lot of tolerance for less than performance situations. And so this role was to have a dotted line reporting relationship to this person. And so they were part of the interview process. And so I remember not sleeping much leading up to this interview for the 2 or 3 days before, and running through my mind, how is it I'm going to explain my performance over the last 2.5 years to this person who I know holds these things they're very important to this person. And so I remember sitting down at a table across from this person, and the leader that had come in, by the way, and said, "Go home, I'll take care of things. You should interview for this role in Denver." His name was Barry. And so I'm sitting across from this operator in this interview, and I'm ready to just make the case why, explaining away my performance, why I think I'm still worthy of the role that I'm interviewing for, so on and so forth. Before I could get a word out, this person looks at me and says, "Hey, I talked to Barry, and I'm sorry. It sounds like we left you out on an island, didn't provide you the support you needed to be successful. We're pretty confident that there's still more in the tank that you have to offer this organization. And so I don't really want to talk about the numbers or the performance issues you've had. I want to talk about what this role that you're going to be stepping into can be." And so I don't know if anyone's ever had that type of experience, but I will remember that the rest of my life in terms of this individual, Barry, exhibiting a set of beliefs in me and the power of that personally and professionally. And so I share that story for a lot of reasons, but maybe one of the reasons is to compel all of you out there as leaders to really appreciate the opportunity you have, kind of this power you hold in terms of the impact your beliefs can have about those whom you lead. And so to me, it's the most powerful experience I've ever had with someone, again, believing in me in a way that I didn't feel I deserved, and certainly was not in line with what I was telling myself.
Right.
And so that's the impact we get to have as leaders. And it's one of those moments that a lot of us have in our careers where you look back, you're like, that was a turning point. I would not be where I'm at today had it not been for that situation.
Yeah.
And out of a simple set of beliefs that Barry held. So Think about it, folks. Great
Yeah.
opportunity for you. This opportunity you have as a leader.
Yeah. It's life changing.
It is. It is. So that maybe leads us into this third bucket, the beliefs others have about us. And so, yeah, the perspectives and beliefs and experiences all kind of fold in together. But what's our role? What's our ownership in how others are viewing us, what they believe to be true about us?
Well, this does tie in very much to some of our prior conversations, especially around emotional intelligence, and when we spoke about the assessment component and formally getting that feedback from others. But to me, this is even a deeper question, because when you do 360 assessments, like we've talked about prior, that's really at the behavioral level, what they see from you. To now have the conversation around what they believe to be true about you, to me, is even taking the intimacy of a conversation to a different level.
Mm-hmm.
And John, for me, and maybe this will just be a nice little kind of full circle back to where we started, the beliefs that we have about ourselves, is to one of the approaches I personally have used in these kind of relationships where I chose to risk it and be vulnerable, is just to put that out on the table and share with other folks. You give them context. Why are we having this conversation? The value of their opinion, the value of our relationship, is for me to share with them, here are beliefs that I have about myself. These are beliefs that tend to be helpful in living the kind of life and showing up the way that I want to live. And then here's some beliefs that I'm struggling with, that I know I need to change about myself. And so there's this moment of just putting it out there, and hopefully being in a relationship with a person that's willing to reciprocate that. So I've done that in some conversations, John, and the response I get is alignment, agreement. Like if I were to say, um, one of the things I've grown a lot in, and it's still an opportunity for me, is being a risk taker and being willing to go down paths where there's uncertainty. And one of the best leaders that I ever have had the privilege of in my life, I shared that with him. I was new to the organization. I think I'd been there about 4 or 5 months, and I was struggling a bit in my performance. And I just shared that with him. And it was powerful for him to say, you know what, as I'm getting to know you and I'm shaping my beliefs about you, I can see that. I have seen times where I wish you would have been more of a risk taker and ventured out there. But what was interesting, I remember one conversation I had with him where he gave me examples of where I was a risk taker and I did do some things differently. So it was this moment of affirmation of something that I knew was a belief that was getting in my way, but evidence of an ability to do it differently. And the bow on this was his commitment to partner with me on this, to give me permission to make mistakes, to get things wrong, to know that he had my back. And without going into why did I have beliefs about myself that I had to play it safe and not take risks, there were life experiences that had shaped that.
Yes.
And I shared some of those with him, and particularly with the supervisor that I reported to. I did not really realize how much that poor leadership was still with me. And and to know that I'm now in a relationship where, yeah, he would agreed with me that this was a learning edge for me, some beliefs that I needed to redirect. But he was committed to my development. And so, John, it's those are the relationships, at least in my life, that I absolutely will cherish till I take my last breath. Those folks that have felt very comfortable sharing with me their truth about me, whether it be at a behavioral level or the beliefs they have about me. So I don't know how else to do this third thing about really understanding the beliefs other people have of you without putting yourself out there and doing that initial work yourself and sharing with people where you're coming from and then asking for their feedback around that as well. So it's this is hard work as well. Maybe it's a different kind of hard work than the first bucket we talked about, but it's a level of vulnerability and realness
Yes.
that you just have to absolutely embrace.
Yes. Yeah. Where my mind gravitates as we're talking through this is in an earlier episode, I talked about the concept of the Johari window.
Yes.
And it's a psychological tool that's been around, I think, since the 50s. But basically, it was designed as a way to understand how we grow and develop, not just as leaders, but really as human beings. And so, what strikes me in your examples there, it talks about how the most growth and development for us happens as human beings when we're able to pull things about ourselves, about our behaviors and actions into what's called the open area, where it's visible to us, it's visible to those around us, it's open, it's honest, it's vulnerable, it's kind of right there and can be
Yep.
dealt with. But unfortunately for all of us, there are things that are in these other two buckets that you have to pay attention to and find ways to pull them into this open area. Well, one area is your blind spot.
Yeah.
And your blind spot is an area where maybe everyone else around you knows these things about you, believes these things about you. And here's the other struggle with this. Oftentimes, when we're experiencing bad behaviors, let's say from a leader, how easy it is to assume, well, they know. The leader knows that they're doing that to us. They know they're having that impact, which, by the way, is one of the reasons people will not provide feedback sometimes to someone. It's like, well, they know. Right. So oftentimes they don't, because it's in this blind spot where they don't see it about themselves. And so, to your point, how active am I in soliciting input from people around, here's some things I think are true about me and some things I intend in terms of my impact. How does that hold up with how you see me? Well, that to me, that gathering and solicitation of feedback is a way of clearing up things that might be in your blind area, your blind spot. Now, there's another kind of quadrant that they talk about in the Johari window that's also a place that you want to find ways to pull this information into the open area. It's kind of this hidden area, those things about ourselves that we don't share for whatever reason. Yep. And so whatever those moments are of appropriate vulnerability, the sharing of intentions, the sharing of what we see, about ourselves, what we believe to be true, all those acts of kind of self-discretion and sharing are another way, bringing others in to not just, increasing the size of our open area, but it's a source of growth and development for us. And so just a couple of things to think about in terms of how do I work on how others see me? Well, soliciting feedback and acts of self-discretion, I think, are a great, two great places to start.
Well, it's maybe one other thing I'll just kind of double click on with what you said there. In terms of self-awareness and blind spots, one of the things that can happen is someone may have an appreciation about a certain behavior that they have and the beliefs that others have of me because of that behavior, but they don't appreciate the degree of impact that it has. So recently I was in a I'll just call it a social setting, And I hadn't been around these people before, but very quickly it became evident there's this one person, this group of people spent a lot of time together, not in a work environment, in a social environment. And this gentleman's just, he's loud, center of attention, cracking jokes. And it didn't take too long for that just to get really old for me. And so it's interesting when you meet somebody for the first time, how quickly you develop these beliefs
Oh yeah.
about other folks. And so this just went on and on and on during this particular event. So I after the event was over, I was having a private conversation with an individual, and I commented about this person and said, "Oh yeah, that's just how they are." And I was just kind of candid, and I said, "Wow, I was ready to get the hell out of there. That was a lot." So yeah, it's that kind of that way for us too. But it wasn't appropriate for me to have the deep conversation about it. But this person, they don't have a blind spot about their behavior. I'll guarantee they have a blind spot about how much it impacts
Yes.
folks. But how often have we been in relationships where somebody is known by a certain behavior? Well, that's George, or and even when you're around the person, you'll joke about it and that type of thing. And I think we're doing a disservice to folks. And I've been guilty of that in relationships where I just grow to accept it. It's just, well, that's just who they are. That's the belief I have about them. Those behaviors aren't going to change. And how much richer and better the relationship would be to have given that person that feedback around to either tone it down or whatever the feedback would look like. So sometimes people have blind spots where they are totally oblivious to it. Other times people are aware of the behavior, but they are oblivious to the degree of impact that it has and the concern
Yeah.
that it creates for other folks.
Well, and that's where people will self-justify.
Yep.
They'll be very aware. I'm aware. I'm loud and I'm fast. It's a means to an end though, and so I'm getting a result. But if I don't realize, well, it's actually causing a negative result or impact over here, that's actually the blind spot. You may have talked
Correct.
yourself into these behaviors, and you're very aware of what you're doing. But yeah, I love this idea. To what degree is it having an impact and actually working against you?
Yeah. So when you have that knowledge of yourself and how you behave and the beliefs you have about yourself, as you're getting feedback from other folks, check in with them. So, for example, I've commented a few times, I am an analytical person. I think things through. I think I have the skill set to look at issues from multiple perspectives. So, what I know is when I'm part of a team working on something, the value I can contribute is I make sure that we're aware of those different perspectives. Or somebody has an idea, I'd like to think I'm skillful of discussing it from a different perspective. I also know that if I overplay that, it gets in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I have had, when I've had conversations with folks and checking in with them, it's like, this is something I know about myself. Are there moments when we're working together? There's a particular board that I'm serving on right now. We've had some issues to go through. And I asked that question of an individual, and that person was just courageous and said, yeah, at times it is. Sometimes we just have to make decisions and move forward. We're never going to get it perfect. She said, I appreciate what you bring to the table and that skill set of multiple perspectives and even playing the devil's advocate, but sometimes that gets overplayed. And so a skill set that I think can serve me well, I also want to make sure that I'm not overplaying that. And that can be a good thing to check in with people, even if it's a strength or a gift or a skill that you have, is to make sure that it's being appropriately used as well. I think sometimes that one gets overlooked. We tend to focus more on the things that we know we suck at.
Yeah.
Totally. But also check in on the other things as well. The things I do well, do I overplay those, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And one other thing to be kind of appreciative here of is when it comes to others, how their beliefs about us might be standing in the way of them sharing their beliefs about us.
Yeah.
And so I think I mentioned to you, Doug, in an earlier conversation, when I was at a really rough point where I had a team member resign, and as he handed me his resignation, I tried to ask him why, and unfortunately, he was pretty candid. He said, "Because it's all about you. It's all about your sense of achievement and performance."
Yep.
And so, as I reflected back on it, there were two issues there. One, their belief, because he was representing not only his own perspective, but the team's perspective as well. And so one belief to get under the hood on, how is it that people believe it's all about me and my achievements when that's not what I intend at all? Here's the other belief I had to unpack. How did this individual believe it was not okay to share this with me until he's on his way out? What are the beliefs of the team that no one has shared this with me? And so it's even taking that on as a leader in that situation to say, well, I got to get curious around that belief set, the belief set that's leading people to believe I'm not open to feedback. And so appreciating how for you as a leader, as you're, maybe exploring this and getting curious around, are there things maybe in my blind spot? Is that getting in people's way of even sharing with you what's going on, what's in the blind spot?
Great point.
So anything else as it relates to the beliefs others have about us? We've talked a lot about the ownership we have in soliciting feedback, sharing honestly with people things that we're working on, using vulnerability, I think, as a tactic on all fronts to improve this. Anything else that comes to mind for you, Doug, as we think about the beliefs others hold?
Well, as you asked that question, and I alluded to it before in terms of relationships we have in our life, is really identify the folks that can do that for you, to have those candid conversations. And John, if someone's listening to this going, I don't have that person in my life right now. First of all, that's a tough place to be. It's a lonely place to be. Hopefully, most of us have some individuals that you can just open up and let them know what you're up to and how much you respect their opinion and you want that information. But if it's not apparent to you who those folks currently are, then ask yourself, who would I like it to be? Who is it in my life that if I don't have that relationship quite yet, and then how might we get there? And my encouragement to you would be is to be that vulnerable person that just ask them. You don't even need to respond, John. I just want to share with you some things that I've been thinking about, some beliefs that I have about myself that are counterproductive or something I'm working to change, and here are the behaviors that can lead to. And I'd like to share that with you and just use you as a sounding board. Could be just an initial way to have those conversations, and hopefully over time, individuals will be willing to travel down that road with you. But none of what we've talked about here today can you really go it alone. It's all about the relationships that we have,
Good
whether
point.
it be at work, whether it be in our personal life. I think some of the most powerful conversations I've had around this topic today have been in my personal life with just good friends. And those are friendships I absolutely treasure. So
maybe as a last thought for our listeners, maybe that's a good place to start personally and professionally, is to take a look at things and think about what are the relationships I want to enrich and deepen. And what a powerful pathway to do that is to have these conversations around, what beliefs do you have about me? Here's some beliefs I have about myself. Such a pathway to trust, which, I think is the entree, kind of the doorstep to meaningful relationships. And really, kind of sometimes busts that myth that's out there around how trust is built.
Yeah.
It's like, trust just takes time. It's like, it's not that time isn't a helpful factor, but if that's all you're riding on, probably not as deep and meaningful as it could be. And so, again, I think a good place to start. What are those relationships I want to deepen and enrich? That's maybe a great place to start with these belief systems we have about ourselves, about others and the beliefs others have about us. Great. Well, really appreciate all of you tuning in to listen to today's episode on beliefs. Tune in. Doug and I have more conversations down the road to come. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again.